Good morning, everybody. I propose to start. We have a few changes in the agenda because we have two speakers, David Rosen and Lin Lee, who are going to speak by video. And then it's my pleasure to have with us today Katherine Marshall, David Moore, and Khushwant Singh. We are going to have between 7 and 10 minutes presentation from all the speakers. I asked Katherine Marshall at the end of the presentation to make a brief summary of what has been discussed. And then I hope that we will have around 20 minutes open discussion, Q&A with all of you. Then thank you very much for being there. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Jean-Francois de Lavison. I am French, as you can see with my accent. My experience is I come from the private sector, from the healthcare industry, in which I worked for 30 years. I was vice president in charge of international operations. It's a French healthcare group. And I left that group 10 years ago to create my own foundation, which is called IMSA Fund. IMSA, it's an Indian word, which means in Hindi, respect of life and non-violence. And the foundation is fully dedicated to health access for the poorest population in the world. That is not anymore a business, but is really philanthropy. And we are working a lot with faith communities. Then I just want to make a few introductory remarks concerning that very, very interesting topic. Once again, thank you very much for the G20 Interfaith Association for inviting us. And just let me start with a few remarks. We need to care, not to vaccinate, but to care the population across the world against COVID-19. We have not to forget that we don't have only vaccination. We have also diagnostics. And due to diagnostics, we were able to take many decisions before having access to vaccination. We need to better collaborate together. We need to better share together. By necessity, the coming years will be different to what we were used to have. Healthcare means, and don't forget that, healthcare means addressing diseases, prevention, well-being, sanitation, affordability, access, treatment, and monitoring. Religious communities, and we are working with those communities now for more than 10 years, live closest to the most vulnerable population in the world. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have many, many things already, platforms existing, and we need to use them. And that project has to be an inter-religious approach. Faith communities, for me, can play many roles to achieve the universal health coverage. Like other constituencies in the main global health initiative and partnership, faith bodies must play a crucial role in the larger global health partnership from which they are currently too often excluded. My conviction is that without the full engagement and partnership with the faith communities, universal health coverage will never be achieved. Faith communities have the resources, the first-class strategic and operational partners. In many, many countries, they own and run more than half of the health facilities. We have a lot of examples. Some of them, Savodaya, the Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka, Muhammadiyah, the Muslim community in Indonesia, they coordinate more than 115 hospitals all over the country. CHAG, the Christian Health Association of Ghana, they are owner of more than 60% of the healthcare facilities in the country. We have many others, Pastoral La Crianza, Friendship in Bangladesh, Pastoral in Brazil, Shanti Ashram in India. We need also to develop new models innovative model. Just, I want to share 3 of them on which actually we are working with. First, it developed a strong relationship and partnership between the industry and the faith communities, of course, with the collaboration of the government. Healthcare industry today is much more open to discuss and to speak and to work with faith communities. And they have to be much more patient-centric than what they have been. Leadership. We see that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a strong lack of leadership all over the world. Political leadership, scientific leadership. Let's just see the situation in Europe. We don't have any European countries with the same approach in order to fight COVID-19. And for that, for leadership, we need to give much more visibility and much more voice to women leadership, which is something very important. And we need to give much more visibility to youth. And that's my pleasure to see that today we are going to have panelists very, very much engaged to youth. We need to share our experience due to our age with the dynamism and the new vision of the youth. We need to work together and we need to engage them. I didn't see a lot of youth during the conferences that we had, and they are key for me, they are important. It is necessary to involve the wealthy in the fight against poverty. We don't need to opposite them. We need the wealthy in the fight against poverty. Is it also necessary to apply local solution to global challenges? And we see that on the field, locally, we have a lot of successful results. We need finally to work with the mobile care. We have in the world 4 billion people who don't have access to health care, essential health care. Then we need to find ways where the care is going to meet with the population. The population cannot go to the hospitals, to the cities and so on. They are living in remote areas. Then we have to develop mobile care. And those mobile care, this is something interesting, are more and more used in our countries from the north. In my country, in France, we are starting to use mobile clinic to go to vaccinate people who cannot go to the hospitals. Then many, many solutions could come from those organizations. My conclusion is that our challenge is to strive together by advancing the values that unite us rather than highlighting the differences that may separate us. And what I say many, many times when I teach in business school to the students is this quote from Seneca: it is not because things are difficult that we don't dare them. It is because we don't dare them that things are difficult. Thank you very much. Katherine, then I give you the floor now. You are then senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs. You are also vice president of the G20 Interfaith Association. You worked many years with the World Bank. Then I let you start, and I will let you conclude. Thank you very much, Katherine.
Thank you very much. I'm going to focus on questions that we see as linking the interreligious, religious communities and the G20. And very near, if not at the top of the G20 agenda this year, is the question of addressing the COVID crisis. It is a worldwide emergency, a worldwide storm. There are many, many actors involved, but there are also great hopes placed specifically on the G20 and their summit at the end of October to galvanize the action that's necessary to bring the world together to fight this pandemic, but also to prepare for ones in the future. So then the question is, what do religious communities and interreligious communities have to do with this? Drawing on lessons from other pandemics, HIV/AIDS, and particularly the Ebola crisis in 2014-2015, my center and the WFDD, but also the Joint Learning Initiative, started in March 2020 to look at how religious communities were responding to the COVID crisis. And I'm going to go through that very quickly and then come back to some of the critical issues for the G20 itself. In this COVID crisis, the religious dimensions became quite clear very early on because there were some large religious gatherings that were linked to the spread of the disease, to the contagion. And so there was, from quite early on, a focus on both large religious gatherings, pilgrimages, of which the Hajj, for example, is one, but also a whole series of different things. I had never realized before that the World Health Organization has a department of large gatherings, which tend to be sports and others, but they came to us asking if we could list all the large religious gatherings in the world. So in any event, in the lockdowns, which of course have been one of the major instruments for dealing with the crisis, worship, places of worship, gatherings of worship have been a big issue, and this I'll come back to, a bone of contention in some areas as to their role. So the question of gathering has been a first issue. Another one has been religious practices, and interestingly, this had been a central issue in the Ebola crisis, but the issue of burials and funeral rites, because of so many tragic deaths, has been a major factor. But so have marriages, baptisms, coming of age rites of all sorts have been curtailed or have been changed and have been subject to relationships with governments. So a second major issue has been practices and posing a new question, which had not been raised in the same way in the past, of are pastoral services part of essential services? A new debate on priorities within economic, social roles in societies. A third issue has been care for those vulnerable, of which there are billions in the world. And the world's social protection systems, which of course vary by government and by place, have been patently inadequate to deal with hunger. People talk about HOVID as well as COVID because so many are dying of hunger. But also in the United States now, for example, big issues on evictions of renters, but so many other issues, of course, schooling, et cetera, have all been disrupted, and religious communities, in ways we will never know the total, have been extraordinarily active in providing a huge range of services that call into question the adequacy of social protection measures. A fourth issue, you can go back to the plague, the ancient plague. Every pandemic has linked to people looking for scapegoats for those responsible. And that has accentuated all kinds of discrimination and hate speech, riots, demonstrations. And of course, the majority of religious leaders have been on the positive side in seeking to diffuse these tensions, but others have been inflaming them and linking it to some political, accentuating the problems of nationalism, religious nationalism, which has been a concern for some time. Another area, which is continues to be something of a mystery but also important, is how conflicts in the world have changed as a result of the pandemic. There was a hopeful message that we were looking to an era of greater and greater peace. The early signs are that that has been disrupted by the pandemic, and that conflicts, old conflicts have flared, New ones have emerged. The whole conflict resolution field has been challenged by the fact that people have been restricted in their movements. And that is another area that needs a lot of attention. And the final area, from the very beginning of the crisis, there was a hope that the common humanity that Jean-Francois talks about would lead us to build back in far fairer, greener, better ways. And the question is how religious communities are actively involved. The Vatican, the Pope, set up a large set of commissions early on, which continue to work, which have as part of their mission to look at these longer-term efforts. And there are a scattering of efforts to look at what building back better for health, for education, for every other aspect of society, including the environment, how those will take shape. And my fear is that the muddle through may be a part of the reality, but I think we're hoping to see something much, much more bold and much more courageous and much more unifying in looking beyond the pandemic. So two immediate questions. The first one is that the issue of vaccinating the world is job one, priority one right now. And we're looking at what some call a moral catastrophe of so few people in poor countries being vaccinated. So religious communities have large roles to play in this immediate current drama that includes production of vaccines, distribution of vaccines through COVAX, but also the actual process of persuading people to be vaccinated, vaccinating them, and dealing with hesitations. So this is for the G20. For the G20 interfaith, this needs to be very near, if not at the top of the agenda at the end of October. The second question is how the pandemic experience will affect relationships between governments and religious communities. This will play out largely at a national level. And the expectation is that the lockdowns, the cooperation, both positive and negative, between religious communities and others will reshape relationships in many countries in the future, whether it's through the courts, through legal, or through political action. And we need to be attentive to how that is taking place. And also to the more negative sides of looking at hate speech and other issues. At the international level, within the United Nations system, within the G20 Interfaith Association, the ways in which these relationships look at the building back better, disaster preparedness, but also the kinds of reforms that we're hearing about here and that we're speaking about so often need to be addressed. And the religious communities need to be at the table, need to be engaged and a fully part of the next steps as we look beyond COVID. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine. You addressed two key questions concerning vaccination and the relationship between government and religious communities during the COVID pandemic. Let me now introduce you David Rosen. David will speak by video. David is the International Director of Interreligious Affairs of the American Jewish Committee. Please,
Thank you
David.
very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Of course, after the wonderful introduction, both from the chair and from Katherine Marshall, the most salient points have already been addressed, but perhaps I could just maybe add a few little aspects to them.
Thank you.
So, in terms of the role that religious communities can play, there is, of course, there are many precedents, as have been mentioned, but perhaps most notably in terms of recent history is the role that we saw religious communities play in terms of combating or responding to HIV/AIDS. as has been mentioned, religious institutions are overwhelmingly the delivery system in terms of healthcare. And one of the organizations of which I'm privileged to serve, one of its presidents, Religions for Peace, was a recipient of a very large amount of money from the Gates Foundation to deal with AIDS orphans. And why did they turn to the religious community and the interfaith community? Because it has the capacity to access people in a way that no other can, through mosques, through churches, through other religious institutions. So this is, of course, makes the religious institutions and therefore the religious leadership, as well as obviously the actors on the ground within these religious communities, critical partners in addressing any kind of threat to the well-being of society, material threat or any kind of threat. Of course, in addition, the role of religion is to provide pastoral care. But we also need, obviously, to understand that this pandemic is not going to disappear entirely overnight. As so many other aspects, we have to learn whether it is indeed HIV/AIDS or whether it's some of the various flus that we've encountered, we have to learn how to live with it. And that kind of pastoral care in enabling communities to deal with ongoing challenges is, of course, of critical importance. One thing that has been alluded to in Katherine's remarks, but of course is critically important for religious leaders like myself to address, to take very seriously, is the importance of our engagement and our involvement in dispelling myths and reinforcing accurate information. So this is not just with regards to vaccination. Of course, that's the critical issue because, as has been mentioned, we have to ensure that the scientific resources available to address the challenge are accessed and that people are able to overcome their fears and the propaganda that various elements for different reasons have propagated regarding the vaccine. But in addition, there have been terrible conspiracy theories. My own community is one victim, but certainly not the only one. There are so many religious communities that have been victims of conspiracy theories as a result of the challenges. And that, of course, has been the situation over the course of history. Wherever there has been a threat to people's well-being, there has been the need to find a scapegoat and to be able to develop conspiracy theories to be able to deal with that. Here we see something really important. It's not just that religions themselves need to respond, because obviously if there's a conspiracy theory that the Jews are behind COVID-19, if I say something as a rabbi, that's not necessarily going to convince somebody who has bought into the conspiracy theory. But if, as interfaith groups, interfaith organizations, and as religious leaders and people on the ground from different religious communities come together to repudiate the misrepresentation and the hateful rhetoric, then it has so much more significance. So we need to see much more interfaith solidarity, response and calls, and examples to see the religious leaders, religious figures, and the youth and women coming together in terms of recognizing this common challenge and, of course, our common humanity, which must transcend all and any specific religious difference. So this, of course, places a responsibility on the religious figures themselves, but not only. And this comes to the second point in terms of the role of religious communities, which has also been alluded to. There has to be far greater collaboration between religious leaders and public health professionals and the institutions and organizations behind them, both in a country-to-country basis as well as globally. Here, I think it's really always important for people who are religious figures or are representatives or members of specific communities to be self-critical. But in all honesty, I don't think that the problem is primarily coming from the religious communities here. I think it's coming overwhelmingly from secular society, which very often relates suspiciously to the religious community, very often presented as archaic and insular. And it is, even if people still hold to these prejudices, they still need to be educated of how counterproductive any kind of behavior based upon such a perception that leads to the separation of religion and science, as if there is some kind of contradiction. And of course, this is important in itself. Religious leaders need to emphasize the importance of science as a religious imperative. Science needs to understand religion as relating also to the well-being, psychological and physical, of people within society. And they need to understand that they are handmaidens for one another and not, God forbid, any kind of opposition. So there needs to be an educational process in which the various institutions, both on a national context and international, are educated about the potential of their cooperation involvement. And so a concrete proposal would already be to have a religious leaders advisory group, a small one, a new small advisory group that of people, of experienced religious leaders who have interest and knowledge in COVID-19 under the auspices, assumedly, of the World Health Organization, that could look at ways in which there can be this cross-fertilization, this synergy, and this important collaboration. What is, of course, also important, and that's also been alluded to, is to identify globally groups, initiatives, and best practices, working towards cross-sectoral partnerships, engaging actively in harnessing lessons of experience. I'm happy to tell you about a wonderful initiative from here in Jerusalem, of which I'm honored to be involved in, that was initiated by some of our greatest scientific and medical experts working in the areas of the pandemic and so many other dimensions, who took this initiative, which they've called Jerusalem Impact Vaccination Initiative. And this is to take the lessons of their experience. You know that even though various variants came back to haunt us here in Israel, the initial response was fantastic. We let our guard down too soon, but nevertheless, our capacity to respond through the collaboration of both the medical institutions, the health funds, the technological skills in identifying where there is a need and how to respond to it, as well as the involvement of religious leadership, serves as a rather remarkable example. And this initiative is seeking to be able to take the lessons globally to ensure maximal vaccination and response. For those of you interested, I'm happy to share the information with you, but those who might have a pen and paper or very quick on their fingers on their phones, the email address is ocg.jerusalem@gmail.com. And the idea ultimately is that this message from Jerusalem is an interfaith message. All the local religious leaders, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Baha'i, Druze, Ahmadi, will be involved in this, but ultimately to make this global. And there is so much that can work on that. So finally, I would just say that the need to be able to develop, just as we need for the world in its own health engagement and well-being, greater religious literacy, we need also better education of managers and medical directors in how to respond, and of course, vice versa, to the faith institutes to be able to have the benefit from the scientific field. And specifically with regards to youth, let me just end with saying that there is so much that can be done if there is a good initiative. That's why having such a kind of a collaborative entity between religion and science under the auspices of the World Health Organization could be useful in issuing calls to seminaries, to universities, to ensure that there is at least some kind of component in training nascent clergy, people who are actually involved in the communities and the services, in basic courses on public health. And of course, there are the organizations that need to be involved in terms of youth that are well known, youth movements, scouts, and then the technology, videos, podcasts that can get the message out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. It's always a pleasure to have you, even from Jerusalem, but to have you and sharing your very interesting remarks. And I've noticed the inter-solidarity approach and the relationship between religion, science, I will say also religion, industry, many other topics for which we need to have a cross-fertilizing collaboration. Thank you very much, David. Pleasure to see you today. Let me now to introduce you Lin Li. Lin Li, she's the director of the Islamic Research Department of the World Religion Research Institute, and she's also in video with us. Lin?
Hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. It's a great honor for me to join this meeting. My topic is about how does the Muslim community adapt to the development of a contemporary society. The world today is marked by the changes that previously unknown in the past century. The pandemic of coronavirus, the decline of neoliberal globalization, the new trade of Sino-US relations, and the changes in the basic operation of international relations. All these confirm this judgment. Today, Muslims are facing a more complicated society than before. In this context, it is undoubtedly significant to discuss how Muslim community adapt to the development of contemporary society. I believe that Muslim community should pay attention to and handle the following 6 relationships in order to adapt to the social development. First, the relationship between Islam and the society. From the global perspective, there are experiences of Muslims living a Muslim majority and in power countries, such as in some countries in the Middle East. And there are also experiences of Muslims living living in a country where Muslims are minority but in power, such as the Mughal dynasty in South Asia. But there is a lack of experience and summaries of how Muslims live in a country where Muslims are minority and not in power. So this situation has made some Muslims to use and copy their living experience in Middle East. As we know, in recent years, in some European countries, such as France, tragedies have occurred one after another. It is more or less related with the lack of such experience. That is, how Muslims live in a society where Muslims are minority and not in power. Therefore, exploring a set of experience of how Muslims live in a non-Muslim society is of significance, of special and important significance for contemporary Muslims. For this perspective, the non-state religion experience and the traditions of Islam in China have some universal significance. Second, the relationship between Islamic law and the national law. Contemporary centuries, the modern countries have their own set of political order and legal system. And Islam also has a set of legal system called fiqh. How should the relationship between these two systems be handled? So the best way for Muslims to deal with the relationship between the national law and the Islamic law is to make these two regulations to complement each other and not against each other. So the faith in Islamic tradition, faith, worship, and good deeds, that is Iman, Ihsan, and Ibadat, are a whole. The premise of being a good Muslim is to be a good neighbor and a good citizen. A person who the person who broke the law and commit a crime can be everything but cannot be a good Muslim. But today, some Muslims forget that good deeds is inseparable from faith. So a renewed emphasis on good deeds is that Muslims today need to do. Third, the relationship between Islam in different countries. The relationship between different countries should be a relationship of equality, not be a relationship between the hindquarter and the branches. The Islamic culture in different nations and places are the flowers of different colors that Islamic faith blooms in different places. These flowers together constitute a splendid and beautiful Islamic garden, just like the geometric patterns on the mosque. The universal Islamic religious faith and the localized Islamic religious culture constitute a beautiful relationship between one and many, where many contains one and one see many. Fourth, the relationship between Islam and other religions. Chinese society have the tradition so-called three religions are connected, three religions are integrated, and the three religions complement each other. It emphasizes that the social functions of the three religions, that is Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. There is also a saying about that Buddhism in Chinese society, that Buddhism take care about the mind, Taoism take care about human body, and Confucianism take care about society. Today, some Chinese scholars have proposed that Chinese tradition culture should not be limited in the so-called three religions, but should also include Chinese Islamic tradition, which marked by the character of Hui, and the Chinese Christian tradition, which marked by the character of Ye. They together constitute a new religion patterns and the religious relationship characterized by the common glory of so-called five religions. The harmonious relationship between religions in China not only provide experience for different religions to coexist in the same society, but also provides a reference for the dialogue between different civilizations. In contemporary society, Muslims should not only pay attention to the dialogue between different religions and different civilizations, but also need to find out that what value they can provide to human civilization and the society in which they live. Fifth, the relationship between Islam and the social development. In recent years, China developed rapidly, and the Chinese Muslims catch up with China's development and have a better condition to practice their religious beliefs. In past 2 or 3 decades, along with the increase of their economic position, in Chinese Muslim, the number of Hajjs have increased rapidly also. That is, every year there are more than 10,000 Chinese Muslims go to Mecca to fulfill their religious practice of Hajj. So poverty and the backwardness are not Islam. The Islamic faith should provide valuable spiritual resources and motivations for social development. China advocates the community with a shared future for mankind under the Belt and Road Initiative, and hope all countries and societies, including Islamic countries, to take to develop together, to complete the transformation from a traditional society to a modern society, and realize the dream of social development and prosperity. 6, the relationship with the epidemic preventing and control. With the coronavirus, the epidemic, China has been one of the countries that have done the best in the epidemic preventing and control. So Chinese Muslims have made important contributions to China's epidemic preventing and control. According to some statistics, since the outbreak of the coronavirus, the Islamic community in China have donated more than 120 million yuan in donation and materials for preventing and control of the coronavirus, which is the most in all the Chinese religious communities. And some mosques have taken action to control the spreading of the epidemic, such as open an online system and suspending some public religious activities. So there is a view that coronavirus will bring great change to the world, and the whole world will be divided into two parts with this symbol. So we cannot foresee the future, but the contemporary Muslim community should pay attention to the preventing and the control of the epidemic and take active measures in many aspects to adapt to contemporary world, and which has undergone the shaping of coronavirus. So that's all. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Lin, and for this very complete presentation. You spoke about minority, religion, and government, collaboration between, and necessity to collaborate. And I'm sure that during the debate, we are going to be back to you with some specific questions. And thank you very much for your contribution. I propose now to have a short video, which is going to be presented by Richard Archep. Richard is the CEO of the CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, engaged in vaccination. Please.
Cyprian, writing almost 1800 years ago in a time of plague, exhorted his Christian brethren not to fear death, but to live faithfully and serve the suffering. What a great thing is it, he said, how pertinent, how necessary that the pestilence and plague, which seems horrible and deadly, searches out the righteousness of each one and examines the minds of the human race. How little the soul has changed in 1800 years. Today, just as plague and pestilence did in the past, the pandemic presents a set of profound challenges to people of faith. For many, no doubt, it is a challenge to faith. How do we make sense of or assign meaning to something as arbitrary in its effects as a virus, something that has disrupted the lives of almost everyone on the planet, and that some now estimate may have killed upwards of 15 million people? How do we justify, in religious terms, the inequity of the virus and the inequity of man in responding to it? It is also a challenge of faith. We worship together in communities of the faithful, and our religious institutions have struggled to adapt to social distancing, to changing rules, to the politicization of the response. At a time when what we need most is solidarity, we have been driven apart, both physically and spiritually. And profoundly, it is a challenge for faith, a challenge to rise above the individual, isolating, alienating fear that separates us, and a challenge to demonstrate the care for others that our faith traditions teach. Pandemics present a problem that can be solved only collectively by living fearlessly and putting our God-given ingenuity in the service of justice. But this we have done only partially and all too imperfectly. The benefits of our ingenuity are perhaps nowhere better demonstrated than in our vaccines, which have been developed at unprecedented speed and now are being delivered at scale. At last count, some 31 vaccines have reached phase 3 clinical trials, and many have been licensed. Over 5 billion doses have been delivered. For the countries that have access, the vaccines are nearly a deliverance, but the inequity of their distribution is nearly unbearable. Roughly as many people have been vaccinated in Singapore or Switzerland as in Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, Chad, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan combined. This is a bitterness that will linger in the mouths and memories of hundreds of millions of people long after the pandemic subsides. It is not within the gift of any of us individually to heal this glaring wound or to determine the actions of governments, but it is plausibly within our gift to persuade the minds and move the hearts of those we can reach, to resolve any hesitancy they may feel personally about the vaccines, and to convince them that global cooperation is right, good, and important. Technocratic governments, in my experience, are mainly blind to the power within communities of faith to mobilize and inspire the public, whereas politicians may understand that power, but usually regard it instrumentally or even cynically. But as leaders of communities of faith, you are uniquely positioned to play an important role in answering and addressing the concerns your communities may have. You have influence with other faith leaders and your own faith communities, to be sure, but also with officials and policymakers and in society. This is an important moment to step up, to leverage that influence and contribute to building a more just world. Without redirection, without a renewal of our commitment, the end of the path we are on is bleak. Cyprian understood the challenge that pandemics present to communities. He said, when the jagged rocks rend the shipwreck is common without exception to all that sail in her. And the disease of the eyes and the attack of fevers and the feebleness of all the limbs is common to us as with others, so long as this common flesh of ours is borne by us in the world. We are indeed all in this together. This week, the Jewish community celebrates Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when believers are supposed to pray, repent for wrongs done against God and other human beings, and practice charity. While the Hindu community celebrates Ganesh Chaturthi, which marks the arrival of Lord Ganesh, the remover of obstacles on earth. Let us fervently hope and pray that through working together in coming months, the obstacles to solidarity against this pandemic are removed. Basil of Caesarea, writing in a time of famine and drought, admonished his congregation with words that are just as apt for our response to a modern plague. The hungry, Basil wrote, are perishing. The naked are freezing to death. The debtors are unable to breathe. And will you put off showing mercy until tomorrow? This is the question we must all ask ourselves individually and collectively. This is the challenge today for the faithful.
Thank you very much. I just want to add something concerning this, the video. It's something I see now for the last, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, is the openness from those international organizations like WHO, like CEPI, but also like the Global Fund, to collaborate and to work and to open the discussion with the faith communities. We are still far from where do we need to go, but I think it's a starting move. We need to push in that way. We need to insist that for the next meeting, conferences, which are going to be organized around vaccination, COVID-19, faith communities have to be present, but I want to underline that there is a small sign that things are improving. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you Khushwant Singh. Khushwant is the head secretariat at the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, PARD. Then Khushwant, floor is yours. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel very honored to speak to you today, and I'm also very glad that I can draw on the various important points that the distinguished speakers have made. I will speak very hands-on, so might be a little bit different from the talks before, so don't be afraid if I really go into the practicalities of development cooperation and collaboration with religious actors. But before I start, I want to show you a picture, and I really want to make sure that you understand I have not been paid or sponsored by this magazine, but I'm showing this picture because it shows that usually the topic of religion is not dealt with by this and other important magazines, which I'm sure you're all reading on a weekly basis. But then this cover page was published recently, and it's just by chance that the people you see here are people who are inspired by religion. In this context, it's my religion, it's a coincidence, the Sikh religion. And they were covered because they did hands-on work in the context of all the challenges we all faced with regards to the current pandemic. And what it shows, and I draw here on all the important points that were made in this G20 conference, that when it comes to existential challenges, of course, we need global answers, but at the same time, the answer itself has to be local. Mohamed El-Sanusi, but also Professor Mohamed Abu Nima, they have also pointed out to this importance. You said also we still need to persuade, or at least there's a way to go to show that religion is important. And when very smart people, or people who are regarded as very smart like Bill Gates, say that in terms of allocation of time resources, religion is not very efficient, and Bill Gates thought that it's not important to work with religions, but then he went to Nigeria and he realized, oh, if I really want to be successful when it comes to polio vaccinations and so on, it is important to consider the networks, the wisdom, and the access of religious representatives and authorities if we want to be efficient. In our partnership, we want to tap into the positive potentials of religion. So governments, intergovernmental, and religious organizations, but also academia, that's why, of course, we are working together with Katherine too. We want to focus on the positive potentials and contribute to the 2030 agenda of the UN. And you see here we are working all over the globe, and the realization of this partnership was that 4 of 5 people, it was also mentioned in this conference, belong to a religion or a spiritual tradition. So why not tap into that potential? Just a few figures. I will afterwards not bore you with figures. We have 144 members right now. We started with 11 members. Now around 40 countries are part of PART. 8 religious organizations from 8 different religious communities are on board, and intergovernmental entities and nearly 130 faith and religiously inspired organizations. And of course, this in itself is a contribution to SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. We work on various issues, but very important, and it has been said in this conference too, we enable a safe space where religious organizations together with governments and intergovernmental representatives can share information, can share evidence. We discuss lessons learned, how to improve, how to adapt approaches. We enable networking. Recently, representatives from the Danish government said, oh, I've joined PART for the first time, but now I have access to religious organizations from all over the world through one hub. It's amazing. We identify common areas of interest where we want to work on. We organize conferences, we bring out publications, and of course, we also address current challenges like the COVID-19 response. On a longer term, we work on 4 SDGs, and I will not go into the detail of that, but you see that we are working on a wide range of topics here. Katherine, you also mentioned these points. The fallouts from the pandemic are huge. I'm not going into the details, but it's very obvious, and especially for those people who are already marginalized. So I think it's important that we do not just talk about restoration, but also we talk about reconstruction. We should not make the same mistakes over and over again, but we have to look into the future so that terminology, building back better, somehow I like it, but I don't like it, because actually we want to look into the future and see how to adapt and how to develop new approaches, also by considering the wisdom of religion, but also of young people, and we will come to that later on. I will give you some practical examples what has been done so far, and these are promising approaches from different religions. I am just picking out a few concrete activities which were passed on to me by members of PART from 3 different organizations. I'm starting with United Sikhs because I wanted to start with a very small religious community and a very small organization which is purely driven by volunteers. I think apart from 1-2 people, no one is earning their daily bread with these activities. They have provided oxygen. They imported oxygen from the UK with a plane and brought it to India to support COVID victims. They went to villages to support young people. They provided food, and you said it earlier on. I mean, people first have to get food, and then, of course, they need a treatment with regards to COVID. So various activities going on at the very ground level to people who are just inspired by their religion. And there's a nice slogan here: they may die of hunger before they are killed by the coronavirus. So that's why they are saying it's very important to give food for those who are already vulnerable and marginalized. And very interesting, you also mentioned it, mental care. They set up a hotline where people who are depressed, who are alone, who do not know what to do, they could just call for free, and volunteers would listen to them. They called it Ear Us. That was their motto. And here I have mentioned something from World Vision. They have a program called Channels of Hope. And I'm mentioning World Vision because they are one of the largest players in this context. And they set up a chat group where they sent messages to religious leaders, but also volunteers with regards to Corona. I will come to that in a moment. So looking at the concrete activities by religious actors, we see it was very important that they share information, mostly through social media, but also at the community centers, about social distancing, about the importance of wearing masks. Very important to contextualize fake news, the importance of vaccinations, combat vaccine hesitancy, it was also mentioned here. They worked on these issues and informed people. Concrete action, as I have said, a lot of things were done on the ground, and it was also mentioned support with last rites. It's very important that this continued during the crisis. Training is another aspect where religious actors played an important role. Concrete training in terms of hygienic training and how to train people so that they become multiplicators in that field. And one other important aspect, which is not mentioned very often, religious actors also developed tools. For instance, a barrier analysis was developed by World Vision to identify reasons for vaccination hesitancy so that you can develop tailor-made programs to tackle these specific hesitancies. Mental health, you mentioned it. It's a very important point to give room to victims, to listen to the relatives who are left behind. People got depressed, and this was offered by various religious actors for free all over the globe. And of course, this is also very important in fragile contexts. Last point, advocacy. Our colleagues from South Africa, who also did all the points I have mentioned here, they were also very strong in advocacy because they appeal to President Biden, our Chancellor Merkel in Germany, for a fair sharing of vaccines. So they pushed the agenda from their perspective and said the responsible politicians should really come to a conclusion with regards to the fairness of sharing of vaccines. I'm showing this not because you should read the facts, but I want to point out to one thing which is a challenge for smaller religious organizations who do amazing work. They don't have the capacity to do PR work, and they don't have the capacity to monitor their impact. World Vision here, they have an amazing monitoring of what they do, how many people they reach, and so on. But a lot of work is invisible because it's not monitored. So it's important we come to the proposals we have that we support smaller organizations or regional organizations to show impact. So, concrete proposals. I know it's not Christmas, not everything will be fulfilled, but at least based on the wisdom of the members of PART, I have put together some concrete proposals, also based on what young people told us, because in the corona pandemic, young people were the ones who were quite often frontliners because they were young, they were healthy, and they dared to do things where the older said, we are reluctant to do this. So consider locally, but also internationally, religious actors and their expertise when developing future responses to crisis. Yeah, draw on their expertise and also their networks, because, and as it was mentioned in this conference, they will stay. People trust them, so they work on a long-term basis. Post-COVID funds. Especially from the smaller religions, it was said that more money is needed for smaller religious organizations because they do not know how to get grants, because they don't have the capacity to apply. They don't speak the language of the UN, of the big donors, and so on. So they need capacity building at that level and the support how to monitor their activities. Focus also on soft issues like mental health. I've mentioned that point. In terms of mental health, for instance, we are just organizing a virtual series on resilience and children on the move, where also young people will speak and they will bring in their expertise why and how mental health needs to be considered when tackling such global challenges. Final proposals. It's very important to enhance the religious literacy of decision makers. Yeah, we need to convince them that it's important not only to talk about religions in these conferences, but in policy making, include them, bring them to the table. Sometimes you have the feeling that also politicians rely too much on so-called religious leaders. We all tend to call ourselves leaders very easily, but I think, and now I'm speaking more at a private level, we need more servants than leaders on this planet. So bring young people to the front, bring those ones to the front who are doing concrete work. Another important point is regional forums. Talk with all key stakeholders, including religious actors, when it comes to finding or developing local solutions. One point I've called it open hearts. Also the religious communities have to kind of think about their responsibility and come to the conclusion that perhaps more creative solutions are needed. Open religious sites for testing, for vaccination. Like in our tradition, it's actually it's normal to have a doctor at a religious place, so that people who would not go to the doctor or cannot afford it, they just come to the religious community center and they have a doctor they can consult for free. So here's my invitation, especially I also see young people here, or at least a few. You are invited to bring forward your proposals, what we can do within the context of PART, and how to synchronize the approaches we develop with local, cultural, economic needs. So we are very happy to receive them. My last and really last point, theology matters. Whenever I talk in this context, everyone tells me theology matters. And the WhatsApp messages that has been sent out to inform people or to show that it's not based on a conspiracy theory and so on, the vaccination issue, they used scriptures to give evidence to the people to show this is what the scripture says, so don't let yourself astray by conspiracy theories or fake news. So for this we have developed one book. It's called Voices from Religions on Sustainable Development. It's there in English, in Chinese, in Arabic and French, where we draw on the scriptures and link it to the current challenges of our current times. Thank you so much.
Khushwant, thank you very much, and I strongly recommend to you to join and to follow the PART initiative. I think that, and I say that we have many existing platforms. PART is one of them. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need really to collaborate and to cooperate with what is existing today. David, your turn then. David, thank you very much for being patient. You are Associate Director of the International Center for Law and Religion Study. I want also to mention that you passed 2 years working with the USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development in Washington, D.C., which gives you also a very broad experience. Then, floor is yours. Thank you very much, David, for being with us.
Thank you, Jean-Francois, and thank you, Khushwant. I think you set up my presentation very well. What I hope to do today is to quickly summarize the breadth of the impact that the pandemic has had, and against that, highlight the role that religion is playing, can play, in responding to the breadth of challenges, and then offer one suggestion that has not been made to date. So we've talked about a number of the impacts of the pandemic, certainly the number of infections and deaths, the impact on physical health directly from the pandemic. Of course, the physical impacts, or the impacts on physical health, are much broader. The Global Fund recently released a report indicating that diagnoses of HIV, of malaria, treatment of tuberculosis, some of the public health progress that we made has stalled or reversed in the pandemic. And so just the physical health impacts of the pandemic are very broad. Certainly beyond that, mental health, as Khushwant indicated, anxiety, depression from the pandemic, other mental health issues have increased. Beyond health, mental and physical, the economic impact, from individual loss of jobs to disruption of supply chains, contributing to inflation, to debt burdens on countries, to increasing inequality economically, have resulted from the pandemic. There have been gender effects, right? Certainly from lockdowns, the risks increased of gender-based violence. There have been development effects from we've sort of reversed course or lost a lot of the progress we have made on the Sustainable Development Goals. Katherine mentioned this when it comes to hunger, when it comes to poverty generally. Thank you. When it comes to education. So the impacts, have been physical health, mental health, economic, development impacts, gender impacts. And I think it's important to think against those impacts of what religion offers. One of the statistics that I think bears repeating that Khushwant mentioned is that over 80% of the world affiliates with a religion. And of those who don't report affiliation, many of the remainder indicate that they have religious or spiritual beliefs. I don't think we could find another demographic characteristic that is shared that broadly by humanity, other than maybe that we're all part of the human race. Right? So whenever there is a world issue, religion is going to be present. Religion is going to be part of what's happening. And of course, we've mentioned the influence that religion has individually, the ability to motivate individuals to accept or reject change. We've talked about the impact of religious leaders. I think it's helpful to remember that sometimes religious leaders are the most trusted leaders in people's lives. In fact, maybe the only leaders that they see. The state is not present in many parts of the world. We think of the state as sort of omnipresent, but not every state has resources to be in every part of their own territory. And so often religious leaders are the primary leaders in certain areas. And their impact can't be understated. I remember in working with USAID visiting a clinic in Bangladesh. And they had a local community council. And on that community council was the local imam. And that was critical to persuading people that going to the clinic was consistent with their Islamic faith. And certainly when it's beyond just going to the clinic, but vaccines and the controversy and uncertainty around vaccines, the role of religious leaders is going to be critical. And it has been mentioned, religious leaders, organizations are often best situated to reach the most marginalized of society. When it comes to mental health, studies consistently indicate that religious people who are religiously active, tend to have better mental health outcomes and physical health outcomes. Beyond that, a study in India indicated that over 70% of those surveyed first turned to their religious or traditional leaders before going to mental health practitioners. So when we're looking at the response to mental health challenges, religion is going to play an important role. Beyond health, resources. A 2016 study found that religion's contributions to the U.S. economy was $1.2 billion in the year studied. That would make religion, if you separate it out, the 15th largest economy in the world. In other words, if we could separate that out, in the G20 summit in October, U.S. religions would be at the table as one of the largest economies of the world. And certainly when it comes to foreign aid and assistance to the developing world, religion plays an incredible role. Going back to my experience at USAID, the U.S. contributes about $33 billion to the developing world in foreign aid in a year. It's the largest official donor. But that is a small fraction of the need. And it's actually a small fraction of the capital that flows from the United States to the developing world. Religions play a significant role. In the year studied from a report I looked at, they provided $6 billion in aid to developing countries, just the religions from the United States for faith-based organizations, more than foundations, more than universities and colleges, and significantly more than the official development of a lot of countries. Netherlands, Norway, Australia, Italy, our host, right? Religious contributions from the United States exceeded the government assistance being provided to the developing world from many countries. Khushwant highlighted World Vision. In World Vision alone spends more money annually than many of the developed countries of the world in assisting the developing world. So the resources to address development challenges are a significant contribution. There's an operational element as well. I remember hearing from a colleague at USAID who led the Africa Bureau there, and so was heavily involved in the Ebola crisis in the Eastern DRC. And he highlighted that operationally, faith-based organizations were critical to being able to respond, partly because they had access. This area was an area of conflict, about 100 entities at warring, and faith-based organizations were there. And so there was access through these organizations. They were key to trust. He highlighted how the WHO understandably came in 20 armored vehicles with tanks, right? This was an area of conflict, very dangerous. But how do you inspire trust when you come in a conflict zone with your tanks and armored vehicles to say we're here to help, right? And religious leaders key operationally there. And then, of course, local knowledge. Just as religious leaders have influence, have networks, have access to the marginalized, they know often the context on the ground. So operationally key to development. So whether it's physical health, mental health, resources, or the operation in terms of development, religion and faith-based actors are inescapably part of the solution. So my suggestion then, how do we take advantage of this? And one thing that I think we may neglect is religious freedom. Right? The context needs to be right for religions to operate and for faith-based operations or organizations to operate. Right? These benefits don't just arise spontaneously. There needs to be an environment in which religion can exist, flourish, operate. And as a human rights lawyer, I see that these are guaranteed. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights guarantees religious freedom. The UN Declaration on the Elimination of Discrimination Based on Religion includes a right for religions to organize humanitarian efforts, etc. But I served a time on the UN Human Rights Committee, which oversees compliance with this treaty. And across the world, religious freedom is under attack, regularly violated. People, for example, arrested for holding religious meetings in their homes, etc. And so a key part of the solution and tapping in to the many benefits that religion and faith-based organizations is creating the environment in which those benefits can arise. And that includes religious freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and impressive. And I think that's something that we have forgotten many times is the financial resources of the faith communities. It's impressive the numbers that you mentioned, and I think that you want to facilitate the collaboration, and we want to educate the potential partners. We need to realize that they have a fantastic financial resource. We are a bit over time, but I want to ask to Katherine, and I know Katherine now for many years. She has a lot of quality, but one of the qualities that she has is she succeeds to sum up the discussion very well. Then Katherine, I'll let you the floor now. Can you try to sum up what has been discussed between the 6 speakers today and to try to highlight the main points? Thank you.
I'm afraid that on my tombstone it will say she did good summaries. And my first answer would be no. I can't summarize, but I think some points to emphasize here is, first of all, the COVID crisis not only highlights the very specific links that religious communities have in the process of responding, the global and the local efforts to respond to the COVID crisis. So the most immediate critical issue, which I think we should not let go, is the vaccination challenge. And as several people mentioned, the specific effort to deal with the misinformation and the hesitancy. It's an ironic situation that as each country begins to face this practical aspects of what they call rolling out the vaccination, you have different phases. So the first phase, obviously, is getting the vaccines invented, getting them there, then responding to the priority communities, healthcare workers, et cetera, and then dealing with those who are reluctant, which is the place where the United States, for example, is right now, is the people who have free vaccine readily available and who are hesitant still. But in many parts of the world, they're not even at phase 1 yet. So this global vaccination campaign, I think a number of people have highlighted it. But I think particularly Khushwant and Dave have highlighted that this is situated in the broader issue of a common approach between the development communities at large and religious communities at large. And there have been historically many disconnects, many gaps in understanding. People are not always at the same tables. And so making that case is what you were doing. Absolutely. And I think to some extent what PARD is also doing. But as Jean-Francois emphasized, there are many platforms now that have developed, that have emerged. The problem is they're not working together very well, which is, I think, another message that has come out from this is the need for much more common effort really to address what the challenges and the issues are. And coming back to the bigger issue, that is a G20 association role. I mean, that is why this G20 Interfaith Forum is focusing on that. I think another point is the challenge, which I think Khushwant was highlighting, which is a classic one, between sort of global inspiration and ideas, and we know we need to cooperate, we know we need to do this, we know we need religious literacy, we know we need development literacy, et cetera. But how do you then translate that to the local level, the community? It's capacity, but it is always complicated. Just a final point, I think the issues of mental health, education, and public health, universal health coverage, in this notion of where do we go next? I think that came out from each one of the people, including David Rosen, Lee in China. Each one of us is hoping that we will take this crisis, the danger, the classic crisis understanding is that it is danger and opportunity, that we will find ways to profit from this to do better, to build better links, networks, and organizations that translate into the policy, the global policy, the economic policy, where one has a better sense of using resources and channeling them to welfare of human beings. But that we will also take this opportunity to rethink education, to rethink healthcare, and as David Rosen was suggesting, to learn the practical lessons of many good things that are happening. So I think I should stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katherine. It was great. Then I don't want to close the session without giving you the floor for 5-7 minutes. If you have any question to address to the speakers, we have David Rosen in Jerusalem. We have Lin Li in China. We have all of us. Any question from your side? Any remark you want to share? Yeah, please. Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. My name is Abhijit Singh Sachal. I am from Canada. I'm 19 years old, and I'm a part of the interfaith delegation here. And so my question really is, you all talked a bit about young people being at the brunt of this pandemic, working together. And so my question really is, we have this G20 Interfaith Forum here, yet there's not young people on these panels. How do we go from that next step where young people are involved directly in policy making, in working alongside you, these actors and young people from these faith backgrounds globally to make the change that we want to see? What are your thoughts on how we actually take that next step from access to these events, which is so amazing, which wasn't here before, to active participation and creation of policy and change?
I can say something.
Yeah, you want?
Speaking from the G20 Interfaith Forum, in other words, the continuing effort, the G20 Interfaith Forum itself is only a small part of the effort, and there are extensive efforts which are building to go into the different topics that are on the G20 continuing agenda, but that are also those that are coming up. So we're looking now already to Indonesia, which is the host for the 2020. And there are extraordinary opportunities for people young and old, including, of course, the youth organizations, but also people to contribute through those. I would also say that there are many other efforts. I know Jean-Francois, he is, again, a passionate believer in bringing young people into, and he has a fellowship program which we've been working with people actually having projects in the health sector, working on a wide range of activities. And I think if we looked at many of the people here, they could point to the same thing. I think David pointed some out. I'm sure there are things in China. We're involved in the World Faith Development Dialogue, the Joint Learning Initiative. Each one of these activities has both opportunities to contribute, but also dedicated specific efforts that are trying to make sure that the prejudices for age and for men and for whatever else are the sort of instinctive reactions, that we counter those to bring in a more inclusive approach.
Thank you very much, and very good question. What I say many times is we need to bring together the wisdom and experience of age with the dynamism and the will and the optimism of the youth. And I think it's something that we have to cope together, to work together. And we have to avoid to create new silos, because we have our program of fellows, but many people have their program of fellows. And what we need to do is to think on how can we bridge those programs in order to have a much global approach with the young generation. And that's a fact, what Katherine say, we launch in my foundation many projects on fellowship, but with the objective to connect and to bridge those projects with the international health organization like WHO and the others. Then anything you need, we'll be happy to speak with you. Any?
Audrey.
I just want to mention that as part of the G20 Interfaith Forum, each working group does have a youth representative from ACWE. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
Thank you. I'm Chris Ferguson, and until recently with the World Communion of Reformed Churches, which is a large global part of the Protestant family. And I just wanted to add to kind of the mapping that one of the mobilizations within our particular community in response to COVID was not only all the very impressive number of factors, but actually, in fact, a new effort from what we would call in our tradition, the prophetic tradition, to actually put all the pieces together and be clear about what the COVID pandemic has revealed about the state of the world. And this is, you picked this up, I think, when you mentioned you're ambivalent about the phrase building back better. And it has to do with a great deal of, perhaps on the side, but actually understanding that this isn't just any kind of opportunity, but is actually an opportunity that demands a change directed to actually the world social order. And that its mechanisms, its apparatus, its the forms of global governments, and that so that there is a religious tradition now at work about all the religious contributions that aren't only service-oriented or overcoming problems, but in fact transformational, and that have to do with using religious resources, which we would call to read the signs of the times, and to look at what are the structural things that are imperatively called to change that block us from being the human community that God wants us to be. So I just wanted to add that there is great deal of energy, although in small concentrated things. Well, a lot of groups are working very hard on questions of service. Other people are saying, what does this tell us about the world, and what agenda does it set for us? So just a thought of adding that to the mapping.
Very good point. Yeah, thank you very much. I have some sign that we have to stop the session, but I want to give the last words to Aza Karam. Aza.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry that I missed a great deal of the presentation, but I'm delighted to have you all, and I just wanted to pay tribute to each and every one of you for the work that you do. I also wanted to say that it isn't the lack of energy on COVID response. There's plenty of work being done. It is the fact that the multi-religious collaboration in the COVID response is pathetic, and there is absolutely no explanation for it. Religions for Peace provided an opportunity with a multi-religious humanitarian fund. I naively thought that everybody was going to rush to contribute. I think one of the lessons learned is we can talk and we can write extensively, and we can meet. But at the end of the day, the real measure of how we care is whether we're prepared to part with something dear to us in the service of others who are not from our community, not from our organization, and not representative of our own institutions. And that willingness to part with something dear to us, a resource, time, effort, in the faith communities is already overtaxed, because every single faith community is a first responder and doing plenty. But the willingness to part of something dear to us for somebody else, for other faith traditions, for other organizations, with others, is not happening. And unless and until we can do that, I think it's just conjecture to speak about multi-faith work and interfaith work and to laud ourselves. But if we're willing to put our own scent in the hands of someone else, for someone else, that's when we're actually doing something that is called upon by our own faith tradition, rather than uphold our own organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aza. Then, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much, speakers. Thank you, David from Jerusalem. Thank you, Lynn from China. Thank you, all of you. It was a pleasure, and hope to stay in touch together. Thank you very much. Have a good day.